Have you ever wondered what would happen if you could think without fear? If you could move through life not reacting to chaos, but acting from an unshakable clarity? If your mind wasn't made to struggle, but to shine? If peace wasn't something you needed to find, but simply something you needed to remember? In a world that constantly teaches you to worry, to fear, to prove your worth, today I invite you to do something radically different. Stop thinking like the world and start thinking like God. This is not religion. This is return, not imitation, but illumination. Welcome to the mind of Christ. A journey back to the way of seeing, living, and creating your soul has always known. A new kind of thinking. There is a fascinating paradox about human beings. We are constantly seeking peace, yet we spend the entire day thinking thoughts that disturb our own peace. The modern mind is like a radio stuck between channels, broadcasting all kinds of static noise, from daily survival concerns to vague fears about the future. I know this clearly because I used to live that way too. Until one day, I realized the problem was not the circumstance itself, but how I thought about it. I still remember the moment I stepped onto this path. It did not come from a fiery sermon or a miracle, but from a very simple question. If I stopped and observed the thoughts running through my mind, what would I find? The answer stunned me. I wasn't thinking like a free person. I was thinking like someone being chased. Every decision, every reaction was the byproduct of a mind trained by the world, afraid of being left behind, afraid of not being good enough, afraid of not being loved. And that was when I began to understand why Jesus did not just come to teach, but to live from an entirely different mindset, one not governed by the world, but led from within. The mind of Christ is not a distant philosophy. It is a way of living. It is an inner space where fear, judgment, and the need for validation no longer hold you. You no longer react, you choose. You no longer struggle to survive. You begin to create reality. And the most beautiful part is, no one is excluded from that space. It is available to you right now, the moment you stop thinking the way you have always thought. People often say, if you want to change your life, change your actions. But I discovered that action is only the surface. The root lies in thinking. And thinking does not change through effort. It changes through awareness. The mind must be seen, contemplated, and then it will let go of what is no longer true. That is not a hard thing to do, but it is rare because people have become accustomed to the noise. I was like that too. I thought a lot, but not with light. I analyzed everything, but never paused to ask, do my thoughts come from truth or just from programming I received as a child? One day, I sat still and let my mind quiet down. For the first time, I did not try to understand. I did not try to achieve. I simply observed my thoughts in silence. I realized that most of what I thought about did not come from life, but from fear. I feared being forgotten, so I tried to stand out. I feared not being enough, so I tried to prove myself. I feared being hurt, so I built an ego that always had to be in control. And as if it were obvious, the outer world mirrored the same frequency. Everything was a reflection of my inner state. At that moment, I no longer wanted to change the world. I just wanted to change how I thought, not to make everything positive, but to return to what is true. I began to learn again from the beginning, not through books, but through stillness. I stopped asking what life needed to do for me, and instead asked, where am I thinking from? From lack or from wholeness? From doubt or from trust? From victimhood or from creation? And I realized that every thought is a seed planted into reality. If I do not guard my mind, I am letting my life grow things I never intended. The truth is, no one is stopping you from entering the mind of Christ except yourself. No force is holding you in anxiety except the habit of thinking from separation. The world can teach you 100 strategies to succeed, but it will never teach you how to return inward. Because once someone knows how to think from the soul, they are no longer easily led. And that is what frightens the world. A mind no longer controlled, no longer reactive, no longer needing to prove. A mind like that is the living expression of Christ. I am not saying this path is easy, but it is the only one truly worthy of your journey. You don't need to change the entire world. You only need to change the place from which you think. From today, start with one simple thing. Whenever a thought arises, ask it where it came from love or fear, from truth or habit, from the world or from God. And if you stay faithful to that practice, there will come a day when you realize you are no longer living the way you used to, because you are no longer thinking the way you used to. That is the day the mind of Christ is no longer a concept, but becomes the way you live, the way you love, the way you create your reality. And everything begins with what seems like the simplest thing, a new kind of thinking for a new kind of life. The silent power within. Have you ever wondered why some people, no matter what they go through, remain as calm as a still lake, while for you, a single wrong word from someone can stir your mind into a storm for the entire day? Have you ever found yourself reacting like a switch, where the moment someone touches an old wound, you lash out emotionally, defensively, saying things you later regret? If you've been there, listen to this not with your ears, but with the deepest part of you. You don't have to live in reaction anymore. You can live from a different place, a place where silence is not suppression, but inner power. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. I used to believe strength was in argument, logic, winning the debate. I thought the strong person was the one who could control every situation, make others listen, gain respect. But life taught me the opposite. The truly strong person is the one who doesn't need to raise their voice to be seen, who can stand in the midst of noise without losing clarity, who can look calmly into the eyes of their critic without needing to defend themselves, because they know truth doesn't need protection. I was once controlled by emotions, overwhelmed by inner dialogues I never dared to end. My mind was like a courtroom, constantly in session. Sometimes I was the accused, sometimes the accuser, but rarely the wise judge. And then one day I realized the problem wasn't that I thought too much, but that I was thinking without foundation. My thoughts drifted like leaves in the wind, reacting to everything outside me. I had never thought from the root. I was operating like a machine, and machines have no freedom. That was when I understood, if I didn't learn to return to an inner space where silence is not emptiness, but wisdom waiting to be heard, I would spend my entire life being controlled by something that is not truly me. The world is clever at making us believe that the louder you speak, the more right you are, that the faster you act, the more likely you'll succeed, that the more people you know, the less lonely you'll feel. But there are voices that need no sound to make others pause. There are footsteps that do not rush and still reach their destination. There are people who sit alone and radiate fullness. These are the ones who have touched the silent power, not the silence of weakness, but the stillness of one who has moved beyond the need to prove anything. Are you living this way? Or are you still letting the outside world dictate your inner world? You can sit in a room filled with light, but if your mind is dark, you will not see a thing. And you can be in total darkness, but if your inner light is on, nothing can blind you. True light never comes from outside. It comes from within, from how you choose to think, to believe, to see. When I speak of the mind of Christ, I'm not talking about some mystical state detached from real life. I am speaking of a state of awareness where you no longer live by reaction, but by recognition. You don't have to wait for calm to feel peace. You are the one who brings calm through your own clarity. From that space, you won't be dragged into someone else's anger. You won't be haunted by their looks, their words, their moods. You won't need to argue, to win, to be right. You will simply remain in your own clarity. The mind of Christ is undivided. It does not categorize things as better or worse, right or wrong. It does not defend the ego because it does not live from ego. It lives from oneness. And from that place, you begin to see others not as enemies or problems, but as reflections of what is unfolding inside you. You stop accusing, you stop blaming, and you begin to heal. Power does not come from how many situations you control, but from how much clarity you keep through them. Awareness is not something you do, it is how you exist, and you cannot fake that. You can only live it. Each day when you wake up, you have two choices: to think like the world or to think like your soul. One leads you to constant anxiety. The other brings you back to a place where you don't have to earn love because you already are life. I'm not writing this to convince you, but to remind you of what you already know. There is a place you can return to whenever the world becomes too loud. A space untouched by time. A voice that needs no words. A knowing that needs no argument. It is the place of truth within you. The place of stillness that knows who you are. The place where you stop striving, stop begging, and begin living as one who is sovereign. This is the power of voice within. Not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. From today on, don't ask how to overcome the challenge. Ask instead, where am I thinking from? If you think from lack, you will always feel the need to strive. If you think from separation, you will always feel threatened. But if you think from union, you will begin to see what has never changed, that you are not a victim of this world. You are the light of it. And true light never needs to shout to be seen, because it is already enough to guide the way. Jesus didn't just die. He demonstrated. We have heard endlessly that Jesus died for humanity, that he sacrificed himself on the cross to atone for sin, that he endured suffering so that mankind might be saved. But there is one truth that few have taken the time to look at deeply. He did not come only to die. He came to live in an entirely different way. And that, more than anything, is the greatest lesson the world has yet to fully receive. Because if death were the whole message, the lesson would have ended at the cross. But the truth is, the lesson began with what he demonstrated before the crucifixion. His death was merely the final punctuation in a living story of divine thinking. A way of thinking that, if humanity understood and practiced, would eliminate the need for sacrifice or atonement, because healing would begin at the root, in the mind. Jesus did not live with fear of tomorrow. He was not controlled by social expectations, nor did he react to insults or attacks. He did not let emotion cloud his reason, nor public opinion distort his inner vision. He did not act to please others, nor strive to prove who he was. Every gesture, every word, every choice he made came from a state of consciousness that was consistent, clear, radiant, and fully aligned with God. That mind did not hesitate. It did not struggle. It was not fragmented. And it was that unwavering clarity that gave birth to every miracle, every healing, every transformation witnessed in his presence. This reveals a profound truth. True power does not come from form, but from thought. It is not external action, but internal union that shapes the world. When he said, "I and the Father are one," it was not a theological claim. It was a precise description of the state of mind he lived in. A mind undivided, a self no longer in opposition to life. And because of that, he had no need to control circumstances. He knew that when the mind is aligned with Source, circumstances will realign themselves to match its frequency. He didn't multiply bread to impress. It happened because, in his consciousness, scarcity simply did not exist. He didn't heal to gain fame, but because, in his eyes, illness had no place in God. He didn't forgive because he forced himself to be kind, but because in the depth of his being, he never saw anyone as guilty. When you think like that, your actions are no longer efforts of morality, but the natural result of a mind anchored in truth. That is why I believe Jesus was not only the Savior, but the first to fully live from the mind of Christ. not as a glory reserved for him alone, but as an invitation for all. He came not merely to give us something to believe, but to show us a model of consciousness, to declare that you don't have to be swept away by the world. You can live from a different level of awareness, one where everything is in order, where every challenge contains light, where even pain holds the potential for transformation. He did not ask us to copy his every act. He asked us to begin where he began, in how we think. This is the subtle but powerful difference between morality and transformation. Morality tries to fix behavior. Transformation changes perception entirely. And perception cannot be faked. It is the invisible foundation of everything you say, do, and decide. He did not come for us to repeat rituals, but to help us remember a deeper way of living. One so deep that you no longer need to behave differently. You simply begin to think differently, and everything shifts. The mind of Christ is not a doctrine to memorize. It is a space you enter, live in, act from, and eventually become. One who thinks from union will act without fear. One who thinks from light will radiate peace. One who thinks from love will have no desire to control, because they already know everything is being guided. And that is what Jesus revealed, not through theory, but through presence. So if you truly wish to follow his path, don't begin by changing the outside world. Begin by observing your inner one. Don't ask, what should I do to be like him? Ask instead, where am I thinking from? Don't strive to be good. Choose instead to see with the eyes he saw through the eyes that did not judge, did not fear, did not divide. The eyes of one who knows they are never separate from life. Change does not begin with emotion or intention. It begins with clarity in thought. When you think from truth, you don't need to try to stay calm. Calm becomes your natural state. When you think from life, you don't need to pray for miracles. You become the miracle because you are living from a dimension where miracles are natural. And this is the part the world still doesn't fully understand about Jesus. He did not come to start a religion. He came to awaken a possibility already inside of you, the capacity to see life through the mind of God, the capacity to live unshaken by reaction, the capacity to dwell in a place that cannot be moved. And once you enter that state, you won't want to go back to your old patterns of thought, not because you are forbidden, but because you've tasted something so pure, so deep, so real, that everything else feels unnecessary. Jesus did not just come to die. He came to live in a way we have forgotten. And he is reminding us, not through thunder, but through a silence so deep that you can only hear it when you slow down enough to listen. And in that silence, you don't have to do anything extraordinary. You simply remember that you have never been separate from him. And from there, you begin to live as a demonstration not of pain, but of light. Not as a victim, but as one who remembers who they truly are. And when that happens, you no longer need to preach. Your very presence is enough to show others that Christ is not just a memory. Christ is a state of consciousness, and it is alive within you, right now. The real disease, separation. The true disease of humanity is not war, nor poverty, nor even ignorance, as many might believe. The true disease lies in something far simpler, yet far more subtle. Separation. People do not suffer because of their circumstances. They suffer because of the feeling of being cut off from something whole, sacred, and beyond words. When a child feels unloved, no one needs to say it aloud. All it takes is a glance, a withdrawal of presence from an adult, and that disconnection creates the deepest wound, a silent pain that can echo for a lifetime. That feeling does not disappear with age. It merely takes on new forms. Self-doubt, fear of intimacy, obsession with control, or hardened indifference. But the root remains the same. A quiet fear that one has been left behind, that one does not belong, that one is a stranger in the very world they inhabit. When people believe they are separated from the divine source, they begin to think and live as if survival is solely their responsibility. They no longer trust in the unseen support. They rely on defense, competition, and possession to protect an identity they don't even fully understand. From there, everything begins to fall out of alignment. When you live with a mind that believes in lack, you cannot love without fearing loss. When you live with a mind that believes in isolation, you cannot give without needing something in return. Everything you do is an attempt to fill a void. But the more you try to fill it, the larger it becomes, because you're trying to heal a spiritual wound with material tools. That is why the thinking of the world, no matter how intelligent, cannot bring lasting peace. It may create temporary solutions, but it cannot offer true healing because true healing begins in awareness. When the mind believes in separation, it sees threat everywhere. No matter how much money, connection, or knowledge you acquire, if you still think like someone who has been abandoned, everything you touch will be colored by self-defense. You won't see the world as it is, but as a battlefield you must survive. And in doing so, you lose your natural ability to perceive the sacredness unfolding in the present moment. Christ did not think this way. He did not act to secure his position. He did not see others as rivals or enemies. He did not forgive out of moral obligation, but because he never felt wounded. A person who has never believed they were separated has no reason to defend themselves. And that is the essential difference between the human mind and the mind of Christ. One is rooted in fear, the other in union. One reacts, the other recognizes. One fights to survive, the other simply exists as light. I once lived in that separation without even knowing it. I thought I knew how to love, to empathize, to connect. But when I faced the fear of loss, I realized I was still loving from a place of defense. When someone hurt me, I reacted as if I had to protect my dignity. I thought I was being honest, but I was merely rebuilding a strong image of self. All my efforts, even when they looked wise or powerful, came from a mind that had not been healed. A mind that still believed it was a lone fragment adrift in a chaotic sea. That was when I understood what needed to change was not my emotion, not my behavior, but the root of my thinking. I had to relearn how to think from truth, not from memory, the truth that I had never been separated from God. I had simply forgotten. And because of that forgetting, I lived as if I lacked. I looked for love in others' eyes. I searched for validation through achievement. I measured my worth by the world's reactions. But when I paused and looked deeper, I realized the light had never left. It was simply veiled by layers of doubt and fear. Union is not a mystical experience. It is your natural state. Once you stop identifying with the ego you learned from the world, the mind of Christ does not come to rehabilitate the ego. It comes to replace it entirely. When you think as Christ thinks, you no longer use pain to define your identity. You no longer need a reason to love. You no longer need perfect circumstances to feel peace, because you are living from a place that has never been fragmented. You are thinking from truth, not reaction. You are remembering what the world's mind tried to make you. Forget that you are one with the source. The real disease of humanity is the forgetting of that oneness. It is the act of living as if we are fragments when we are in fact the whole. And until that realization takes place, all healing efforts will only be temporary patches. But the moment you begin to think from a place beyond separation, you will no longer see yourself as a victim of your circumstances. You will recognize yourself as the light within them. And light does not need to fight. It only needs to be present. That is true power. And that is the only path to lasting freedom, not through outer action, but through the complete reconstruction of inner thought. not through striving to become better, but through returning to the nature that was never broken. When you think from that place, the world is no longer a battlefield. It becomes a classroom. And you no longer need to win. You only need to awaken. Letting go of the old script. There is an old script written deep within your mind. One you did not author, but inherited. It was formed when you were too young to question and too eager to belong. You learned that to be loved, you must behave. To be accepted, you must achieve. To be safe, you must avoid conflict. And so, you grew not as a free soul, but as an actor rehearsing lines not your own. Your role may be the kind person who always pleases others, the successful one terrified of failure, or the strong one who hides their wounds. Whatever the role, it is a mask, a well-crafted performance designed to help you walk through life without being hurt again. But have you ever stopped and asked, am I living from truth? Or am I merely acting out a worn-out script that no longer fits who I am? That script is clever. It whispers that you cannot change. It reminds you of your past failures every time you try to step beyond your comfort zone. It makes you feel guilty for choosing yourself. It's the reason you still feel inadequate, no matter how much you've tried. It is the old operating system quietly running every decision. And because it runs silently, it's easy to miss that it's directing your inner life entirely. To step into the mind of Christ, the first step is not learning something new, it is releasing what is old. Not releasing through willpower, but through awakening. You realize you no longer fit the role, and you simply step off the stage. No bitterness, no regret, just a clear knowing that it's time to be real. Because you were not born to be a replica of collective expectation. You were born to radiate your own light, and that light cannot shine through lifeless roles. Letting go doesn't come from force. It comes from seeing something so clearly that you can no longer deny it, the truth that you no longer find joy in pretending, that you're tired of living a life where control defines safety, that you are no longer afraid of being misunderstood, because you finally understand yourself deeply enough not to require approval. When you stand in that place, you discover a strange and liberating freedom, not because the outside changes, but because you no longer live under the rule of fear's old narrative. Christ did not come to write a better script. He came to end all scripts. He did not invite you to become a more virtuous version of your ego. He invited you to abandon the ego entirely and enter a life led by the soul. This is not a cold rejection, it is a return. A return to your original state, where you no longer need a role to feel worthy. A return to awareness untouched by expectation or fear. A return to yourself without the language of the past. I once clung to my script. I thought it was who I was. I defended it when anyone got too close. I built my self-image around it, even took pride in it, until I realized it was dimming my light. I could not live in freedom while protecting an image. One of them had to go, and I chose to let the image go. Not because I no longer needed to be loved, but because I had started loving myself enough not to pretend anymore. Letting go of the old script doesn't mean abandoning your past. It means refusing to let the past dictate your present. You can remember what happened without letting it define who you are. You begin to tell your story from a new vantage point, not as the victim, not as the hero, but as the honest witness, one who knows everything served its purpose, but none of it needs to be carried forward as pain. If there is anything to learn, it is the art of releasing with gratitude. You thank the old script for helping you survive. Then you bow to it, like an old friend who will no longer travel with you. You do not resent it. You do not mourn it. You simply no longer need it to continue, because you know what waits on the other side of letting go a space entirely new. A space where you do not have to become anyone, only to show up as who you are. A space where the mind of Christ can take root. A space where you stop performing and begin to truly live. From theory to practice. I used to believe that knowledge was the destination, that if I read enough books, listened to enough teachings, and accumulated enough theory, I would automatically become wise, free, and at peace. But then came the days when I sat alone with hundreds of pages of notes, and my heart was still just as restless. I could repeat the words of the masters, but my soul still reacted to the world like an invisible struggler longing to be seen. I said the right things, but lived no differently than I did yesterday. And that was when I had to face an uncomfortable truth. Knowledge means nothing if it is not practiced. I began to realize that theory is a safe place for the mind. It gave me the illusion of growth without requiring actual change. I could speak of gratitude while sighing with resentment when life didn't go my way. I could explain surrender, yet still cling to toxic relationships out of fear of being alone. I could talk about self-acceptance, yet stare into the mirror each morning with quiet judgment. Theory, if not brought into life, is nothing more than a beautiful coat hanging in the closet. It warms no one, shields nothing, and reveals nothing about who you truly are. True transformation only happens when you bring the light of understanding down into the soil of action, when you do not just speak of forgiveness, but actually sit and release the pain that has haunted you for years, when you do not merely read about presence, but put your phone down and listen to the person in front of you with your whole heart. When your actions become living quotations, not because they're impressive, but because they're real. That is the only honest measure of wisdom. Christ did not come to teach you a new mindset. He came to invite you to live it. He didn't write books, hold seminars, or publish teachings. He simply lived. And by the way he lived, he touched the deepest places in those ready to see. His thinking wasn't conveyed through theory, but through presence. A presence that required no explanation, no justification, just an energy so clear it could not be denied. And that is the same place you are invited into, not to analyze anymore, but to embody. Practice is not something grand. It begins in the smallest of moments, carried out from a new state of being. A carefully chosen word when anger rises, a decision made slowly under pressure, a kind gaze instead of a judging one, a quiet moment with yourself instead of rushing to fill the silence. These seem invisible, yet they are where the mind of Christ begins to take root, not through noise, but through unmistakable silence, not through achievement, but through simple presence. I once believed change came from big inspiration, that it required a breakthrough or a dramatic push. But deep change doesn't come from impulse. It comes from conscious repetition, a little every day, but from a place within that has awakened. A small act, but guided by clarity. It is a slow path, but a sustainable one. It is the kind of practice that needs no applause, no recognition, and it is exactly there that you begin to feel this truth. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. As you begin to practice, you'll notice the difference in how you respond. You won't be swept away by criticism. You won't feel the need to explain yourself. You'll stop defending an image because you're now living from essence. You won't fear others' opinions because you know where your thoughts are coming from. Every action becomes a prayer not through words, but through intention. And from that place, you finally step into a sacred life. The truth is, you don't need more advice. You simply need to live what you already know. You don't need to change the world. You just need to let one of your choices today be guided by new awareness. And tomorrow, let another choice follow. Over time, this new mindset will no longer be something you struggle to remember. It will become something you can't help but live. Not because you are perfect, but because you have started to live truthfully. And sometimes, living truthfully is already a long way ahead. Mental maps of spirit. I used to believe the external world was the map, that if I understood enough, planned thoroughly, and laid out every detail of my life, I would always know where to go, what to do, and everything would unfold as calculated. But then I realized, the most important map is not in your hands, it's in your mind. And the irony is, most of us are navigating life with outdated maps, drawn by fear, past wounds, and beliefs we've never paused to question. You see, everyone carries a mental map. A map that defines what is safe, what is successful, what is right or wrong, what makes you lovable, and what makes you unworthy. And most of those definitions did not come from your own original experience. They were layered onto you by your parents' voices, your teachers' glances, and the invisible echo of society repeating itself throughout your childhood. These impressions became pathways in your brain, and from there, you began to steer your life as though those ideas were absolute truth. When you live through an old map, every journey you take becomes distorted. You might walk into a beautiful opportunity, but the old map will tell you that you are not worthy. You might meet someone who loves you sincerely, but the old map will warn you it's dangerous, that they will eventually leave. You might stand before a great dream, but the old map will pull you back to your comfort zone because it was drawn with the ink of doubt and limitation. And you might call that intuition, when really, it's just memory in disguise. To enter the mind of Christ, you cannot use an old map to find new land. You need to redraw everything, not by erasing blindly, but by questioning every line. Why do I believe this? Where did this belief come from? Is it still true? And if I release it, what new truth might appear? This is not a quick journey. It is a journey of observation, of honesty, and most of all, of courage. Courage to face the blind spots in your mind, the places you once walked past, as if they were facts carved in stone. The map of spirit is not written in commands. It is felt through experience. It does not ask you to follow the beaten path, but invites you into the unknown. It does not speak in the language of fear, but whispers with refined intuition. And when you begin to listen, you'll realize something profound. Your mind has never truly been quiet because it's been too busy following the wrong map. Every decision has been shaped by an outdated version of you, no longer reflective of the light now living inside. So how do you create a new map? By beginning with presence, not presence as theory, but as a lived moment, sitting down, turning inward, and listening to what is alive in your heart. What parts of you have been ignored? What voices have gone unnoticed? What fears have been disguised as practical logic? Look at them not to analyze, but to understand, because understanding is the first stroke of redrawing. And when understanding begins, you no longer fight with yourself. You simply rewrite the route from where you are now, using the light you carry now. Christ did not come to hand you a perfect map. He came to awaken in you the capacity to draw your own. He did not ask for obedience, but for exploration, step by step, choice by choice, moment by moment, as you turn away from the old script and move toward the unknown. That is not being lost. That is freedom. Because in truth, only when you no longer rely on the old route can you begin to feel the real guidance rising from within. I'm not saying you have to erase all your memories or discard all past knowledge. I'm saying it's time to examine them. Time to stop living on the path drawn by others, and instead ask yourself honestly, what direction most reflects the truth in me right now? What is the choice I would still make even if no one ever saw it, because I know it's right? When you live from that place, the map is no longer something you depend on. It becomes something you create each day through awareness and love. In the end, the most precious map is not in your mind, but in the aliveness of your spirit the moment you stop chasing theories and start listening. Because as I've said before, this is the power of voice within. Not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. And in that space, every answer is already present. No need to search far. Just pause long enough to feel, and then you will know you are on the right path, not because someone confirms it, but because your soul is quiet and clear. The inner division ends now. I used to wonder why some people, even with everything in their hands, still felt like something essential was missing. And then one day, sitting alone in a room of complete silence, I looked directly into the unease within me and saw a truth that was hard to swallow. It wasn't the world that caused my pain, it was the division inside me. One part of me wanted to move toward light, while another clung to darkness simply because it was familiar. One voice said, "Trust," another whispered, "Don't be foolish." And that battle raged constantly, like two currents pulling in opposite directions through a single exhausted body. We live in a society that teaches consistency, but rarely teaches inner unity. From a young age, we are trained to present the best version of ourselves outwardly, even when we are breaking inside. We smile when we're sad, agree when we want to object, comply just to keep the peace. Every time we do that, we push a part of our truth into silence. But that silenced part doesn't disappear. It lives on, quietly demanding recognition, longing for healing. And if we keep ignoring it, it will eventually unravel everything we've been trying to hold together. I'm not writing this to accuse anyone. I write it because I have lived it. I know what it's like to wear too many roles in a single day, to be kind and angry at once and let no one see it, to love yet doubt, to trust and fear in the same breath. These unacknowledged contradictions drain our life force. They sever the connection to ourselves, and from that place of disconnection, we begin chasing validation from others, from achievements, from things beyond our control. Christ did not come to ask you to be good. He came to help you see the entirety of who you are, your light and your shadow, your softness and your strength. He never asked you to deny your wounds. He asked you to enter them gently. He didn't teach you to pretend peace. He taught you how to sit with your chaos without judgment. When you stop trying to fix yourself to match someone else's standard and begin listening to what your soul truly needs, that is when integration begins. Not because you are perfect, but because you've stopped waging war against yourself. Inner division cannot be healed through force. It softens only when it is seen. Every part of you exists for a reason. Even fear, even anger, even avoidance, they were once your way of staying safe. And when you begin to see that, not with condemnation, but with understanding, your heart will soften. And from that softness, true integration naturally begins to restore itself. You no longer have to strive to be someone. You simply show up fully, with all that you are, in every feeling, every situation, every state of being. This is not a short journey. It requires relentless honesty. You have to be brave enough to pause in the middle of the noise and ask, does what I just did truly reflect who I am? Was that last word I spoke from truth? Is this path I'm following based on love or on fear? And most importantly, what am I still hiding from myself? These questions are not meant to make you feel guilty. They are invitations into a dialogue with yourself that is essential for ending the split within. Because only when you stop living in halves can you experience true peace. No longer needing to prove yourself, no longer exhausting yourself trying to please. You become whole, clear, honest, undivided by expectation. You start saying what you truly believe, doing what you deeply trust, and choosing paths that reflect your real values. From that place, you no longer wake up weary each morning because you're no longer living like someone in costume. You are simply you, and that is enough. This is not just an invitation, it's a reminder. No one can mend the split inside you unless you face it yourself. No one can unify you if you still choose fragmentation. And there is no quick formula for healing. But here is what I do know. When you begin to look into yourself without decoration, without denial, a deep peace will begin to rise. Not from outside, but from within, from that sacred voice that's been patiently waiting for you to return. And that is when you will know the division has come to an end. Not by magic, but by the honest presence of who you are today. Seeing with spirit eyes. Something remarkable happens when you begin to see the world through the eyes of the Spirit. Everything around you remains the same, but you no longer see it in the same way. People who used to anger you suddenly become understandable. Situations that once made you lose control now appear as lessons wrapped in the paper of challenge. You stop being pulled by the surface and begin to see the invisible structure moving beneath it all. And from that moment, you realize that what needs to change is not the world, but the eyes through which you see it. I used to view everything differently. I judged others by their attitude, measured my worth by my achievements, and predicted the future through fear. I believed that everything out there was either against me or required me to prove something just to keep going. But then, there came a moment when I let go of all those formulas, not because I reached some grand enlightenment, but because I was exhausted. I no longer had the energy to keep fighting, and in that exhaustion, silence opened up, a space I had never encountered before. No judgment, no comparison, just a presence subtle, real, and undeniable. That's when I saw that most of the time, we're not truly seeing, we're replaying old reaction patterns. We don't see the person in front of us for who they are, but through the lens of past experiences, still waiting to be healed. A furrowed brow reminds us of someone who once hurt us. A rejection feels like the world is turning away. A silence makes us believe we are unworthy. But if you pause long enough, you'll realize it's just a lens you've worn for years without noticing. And you can take it off. To see with spirit eyes doesn't mean you ignore reality. On the contrary, it allows you to see reality more clearly, but without being bound by reactive emotion. When someone is rude, you no longer feel insulted. You see someone living from unresolved pain. When someone succeeds ahead of you, you no longer feel small. You see an invitation to expand your inner horizon. When life disappoints you, you no longer feel like a victim. You see a chance to practice what you've learned about trust, patience, and unconditional love. Christ didn't come to give you a new set of moral codes. He came to teach you how to see with eyes cleansed of judgment. He didn't offer just another belief system. He offered a new way of seeing everything: people, events, life itself. That's why some people radiate peace even in hardship, while others remain anxious despite having everything. It's not the circumstance that differs, it's the perception. When you see with spirit eyes, you no longer ask why life is unfair. You begin to ask, what is the lesson here? You no longer get caught in the game of right and wrong. You look deeper into the true motive behind the action. You no longer need the world to agree with you in order to feel worthy, because you've seen the light that has always lived within. And the miracle is, when your way of seeing changes, the world begins to respond to you with a new energy, gentler, clearer, more aligned with who you truly are. But to see with those eyes, you must cross a fragile threshold, the threshold of acceptance. You must accept that you've misunderstood many things. You must accept that not every thought you've had is true. You must accept that you may have lived too long in a reality distorted by fear, control, and unspoken wounds. And when you have the courage to accept that, a new sky opens not outside, but within your own mind. The eyes of spirit do not come from effortful thought. They arise from a deep stillness within. When you pause, when you listen, when you stop letting the mind shout so loudly, a subtle clarity begins to appear. It doesn't speak in noise. It doesn't argue, but it's unmistakably clear. It tells you when to speak and when to remain quiet, when to move forward and when to pause, when to forgive and when to extract the lesson. And you don't need anyone else to tell you. You only need to return to that clear voice, that place within where you truly see, not just with your eyes, but with the full presence of your soul. Transformation is not a mood. Transformation is not a fleeting burst of inspiration. It's not like waking up on a beautiful morning, feeling thrilled about life, opening your window to the sunshine, and deciding to change everything. No, true transformation doesn't arrive with dramatic flair. It shows up on the dull mornings, on the days you don't want to get out of bed but still do. It appears in moments when motivation has left you, yet discipline remains. Transformation is not a mood. It is a decision, quiet, repeated, uncelebrated, just you and yourself. I used to believe change would come like a wave of inspiration, like in the movies where the protagonist has a life-altering realization and everything shifts for the better. But life isn't like that. Real life is doing the right thing, while everything around you urges you to quit. Real life is choosing to keep going, not because you feel strong, but because you refuse to live one more day the way you did before. And in the midst of all those choices, tired, uncertain, uncheered, you begin to notice small changes. So small others may not see them, but you do. You notice you no longer react when criticized. You notice you don't judge someone just because they're different. You notice you took a deep breath instead of raising your voice. That is transformation. Quiet, undramatic, but real and lasting. To sustain that, you need a place to return to, not a physical place, but an inner space. A silent sanctuary where no explanation is required, no defense needed, just breath and listening. That space doesn't come from the outside. It is lived within you all along. You just have to remember it. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. No one can take that place from you. And it is from there that you draw the strength to continue fully and deeply. Many begin the journey of transformation when they're feeling euphoric. They read a book, watch a video, hear a motivational talk, and for a moment, life seems radiant. But within days, when reality doesn't shift fast enough, they lose heart. Because they think lasting change depends on maintaining emotional highs. That's the mistake. True transformation doesn't ask you to be joyful all the time. It asks you to be honest and consistent. In fact, the days you feel the worst may be the most important ones, because that's when you confront your old identity. That's when you're most tempted to return to familiar habits. And if you can hold your new commitment in those moments, you've already made a massive leap. You won't notice it right away, but over time, you'll look back and realize you have changed without even realizing it was happening. You don't need to feel ready to begin. You don't need to wait until you have enough faith, enough energy, or enough time, because you will never feel entirely ready. But you can choose. You can choose to act while unsure. You can choose to keep a promise with no one watching. You can choose to hold light in your mind even when darkness surrounds you. Transformation doesn't arrive like a miracle, but its result feels miraculous. Not because the world has changed, but because you have changed the way you live in it. You start to live more consciously. You begin to know what is real and what is simply reaction. You learn to tell the difference between the voice of your essence and the echo of fear. And in that process, layers of illusion fall away, revealing your true self, not a flawless version, but a human being growing in honesty. Remember, you don't have to be perfect to begin. You just have to be honest enough not to quit. You don't need others to understand your path. You only need to understand that this journey is yours and no one else can walk it for you. And the beautiful truth is, once you fully commit to transformation, the universe begins rearranging itself. What once took massive effort to attain begins to arrive as a natural response, not because you forced it, but because you became the person who could hold it. So if today you feel uninspired, that's okay. Come back, sit with yourself, take a deep breath, listen to that quiet voice. No answers needed, just presence. Because right there, in that presence, transformation continues not with noise, not with urgency, but through your choice to live in truth, again and again. And that, more than anything, is what makes a life reborn. You are the light. You were not created to seek light from the outside. You were created to remember that you are the light. That may sound simple, But it is the very truth most of us forget at a very young age. From the beginning, you were taught that love must be earned through obedience, that worth must be proven through achievement, and that visibility must be fought for. And as the years passed, you began to believe that light was something distant belonging only to the gifted, the perfect, the chosen. But the truth is, no one can give you the light because they too are searching for their own. I still remember the day I realized this. It was not a day of strength, but of exhaustion. When you've spent long enough chasing something outside yourself only to feel empty, there comes a moment when you are forced to turn inward. And in that terrifying silence, you will hear something deeply familiar. Not the voice of expectation, not the echo of society, but a whisper soft, steady, and real. It does not shout, because it never left. It is the voice of the light within you. We don't need to become the light. We only need to stop pretending we are not. Stop playing roles. Stop chasing images. Stop believing we're not enough. Every time you shrink yourself to make others comfortable, you dim your light. Every time you compromise what your heart knows is wrong, you place a veil over your brilliance. And then you wonder why the world seems dark. It's not because the light has gone. It's because you've covered it with layers of mistaken belief. You are the light, not because you are flawless, but because you are true. And truth always shines, even when no one acknowledges it. Light doesn't need applause to keep glowing. It only needs to be freed from assumptions, from fear, from conditioning. When you live truthfully, your light radiates naturally. No effort, no force. And when your light ignites, darkness is no longer the enemy. You don't fight it. You simply illuminate, and everything adjusts to the glow. I once thought I had to do something extraordinary to change the world. But I've learned real change begins when you have the courage to no longer hide your own light. When you stop living to please others and start living to be true to yourself. When you stop using old wounds as excuses to hide your gentleness, your wisdom, your love, light doesn't need to be proven. It only needs your permission. You cannot inspire if you are not lit from within. You cannot lead if you refuse to return to your center. And you cannot love fully if you continue denying the brilliance that is your birthright. Light is not a performance. It is your original essence, unpainted, unfiltered, unadorned. When you live in that light, every word carries clarity, every action carries weight, and your very presence becomes a quiet reminder. Others carry that light too. So if today you feel ordinary, pause. Close your eyes. You don't need a deep thought. Just feel. Not light from the sky, not light from a quote, but the light within you. Still there, still waiting to be seen. And once you see it, you'll no longer fear the dark like before. You'll no longer fear loss, loneliness, or being left behind. Because you'll know whatever happens, that light remains. No one can steal it. No one can extinguish it unless you let them. You are the light, not when you're praised, not when you achieve, not when everything feels okay, but even when you feel broken, unsure, and tired. Light doesn't flicker with mood. It's only hidden when you forget. But now there's no need to forget. No need to act. Be real. Stand tall. Walk like someone who knows they are the source of light. And with every step you take, you remind this world, the light is still here, and you are living proof of it. God's will is not a threat. How many years of your life have you carried the vague feeling that God's will is something fearful, something imposed, something that might require you to give up everything you love? Have you ever heard the phrase, God's will, and felt a chill inside, as if it meant a road full of suffering? If you have, you're not alone. I used to think that too. I used to believe that living in alignment with God meant self-denial, meant becoming a righteous version of myself that was dry, forced, and lifeless. But one day I realized this. The frightening thing is not God's will. It's what we've projected onto it. The truth is, God's will has never been a threat. It is an invitation. Can you dare to believe that the deepest will of the divine for you is peace, freedom, and wholeness? Not a replica, not a mold, not a version of yourself distorted by societal expectations, but you in your purest, most natural, most radiant form. God's will does not shout. It does not punish. It does not demand. It only whispers, soft as a breeze, near, true. But most often, we are too busy to hear it. You might be asking, if God's will is freedom, why do I feel stuck? If it's peace, why am I still anxious, still pretending, still unsure every day? The answer is this: because you have been living by the opinions of the world, not the will of God. The world tells you to compete, to outsmart, to prove. God tells you to listen, to return, to trust in who you truly are. And those are two very different directions. I spent most of my life living by what others expected. I tried to be lovable, successful, agreeable, but the more I tried, the more I lost connection with myself. And I didn't know why I was so tired, until I stopped and asked a very simple question. What would happen if I stopped running? If I did nothing more and simply sat still to hear what God might be saying to me? In that moment, I realized truth does not arrive with thunder, but once you hear it, you never forget. God's will does not ask you to become someone else. It only longs for you to return to yourself. It does not demand you change in order to be loved. It loves you so deeply, you find the courage to change. And that change is not rebellion. It is return. Return to a mind no longer fighting itself. Return to a heart that no longer bargains for worth. Return to a spirit willing to live in truth. That's when you stop asking, what must I do to be accepted? And start asking, do I have the courage to live in the light I carry? Let me ask you something. Right now, in this moment, if God's will is not a fearful demand, but a loving invitation to be fully yourself, will you say yes? Will you let go of the belief that you must be worthy, proper, perfect? Will you accept that you were not born to please the world, but to embody the divine essence right here in the midst of your life? If you're still reading these words, perhaps something within you is stirring, and I invite you to leave a sign. Let me know you're still here, still listening, still walking this path. Maybe just type a 1, or if you feel it's time, write, I'm ready to change in the comments. Because every word you speak is a declaration to your soul. You are no longer living the old way. Don't fear God's will. Fear missing it. Fear spending a lifetime living by a script you never wrote. Fear the quiet, pretending when your soul is silently screaming to be real. And then, let that fear dissolve in a gentle decision. I will not hide anymore. I am ready to change. I am ready to walk a different path, one not built on fear, but rooted in trust. Thank you for walking with me this far. Not everyone has the courage to hear what is not easy to hear, to look within without flinching. But if you are still here, I believe it is not an accident. You are being called. And the invitation is not from a religion, not from a doctrine, but from the light within you that is ready to live fully. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Are you ready? Perfection isn't performance. Perfection isn't performance. It may sound contradictory, because your whole life, you've been taught that perfection is something you must earn. Through effort, through achievement, through a long list of flawless behaviors. You were praised when you were right, corrected when you were wrong. You were acknowledged when you excelled, ignored when you didn't deliver. And slowly, you began to equate your worth with your output. You believed that unless you could prove something, you weren't enough. But the truth is this: the more you chase the world's version of perfection, the further you drift from the wholeness that has always lived within you. Imagine yourself as a child. playing freely in a garden, unaware of right or wrong, acceptable or unacceptable. You were simply present, joyful, alive, and in that state, you were already perfect. Not because you earned it, not because you got a gold star, but because you were whole. Then, over time, you were taught that to be loved, you had to do it right. And that's when the departure began. You split yourself in two, the part that strives to be worthy and the part that hides whatever doesn't please others. When you live as if perfection is a performance, you don't just put pressure on yourself, you unconsciously place it on others. You expect them to measure up to the same image you're struggling to maintain. And instead of connection, you live in comparison. Instead of presence, you live in performance. Each day, you wear a mask and call it your identity. But deep within, a part of you knows it's tired. What Emmet Fox would remind you is this: you don't have to perform to be loved. You don't have to be right all the time to feel safe. You don't need to reach some impossible standard to be worthy. True perfection is not found in never being wrong, but in living honestly even when you're wrong and growing through every experience without losing love for yourself. The world may judge you by results, but life doesn't. Life only asks, are you living sincerely? Are you choosing love over fear? Are you willing to bring your scars into the light and still call them holy? If you look back at the most beautiful moments of your life, you'll realize they weren't the times you looked perfect. They were the times you were real, when you laughed so hard you didn't care how you looked, when you said what you truly felt without filtering it, when you shared a wound without hiding behind a smile, when you allowed yourself to be vulnerable, when you released an old expectation. That is when you came closest to wholeness. Not because you did everything right, but because you were aligned with your truth. Perfection, in its truest sense, is not a destination. It's a state of no longer fighting yourself. It's not a better version of you tomorrow. It's you returning to the unconditional love that already exists within. And the irony is, when you stop trying to become something else, you finally become what you've always been. No striving, no exhaustion, no pressure. Just you in your realest form. So if today you feel not good enough, please remember that's just an old voice replaying in your mind. Don't confuse it with truth. The truth is, you don't need to perform. You don't need to meet everyone's expectations to be worthy of your own life. What you need is to reconnect with your original presence, that space where no explanation is necessary. No approval is required, and no battle needs to be won. I don't write this to tell you to abandon effort. On the contrary, I write this so that your effort is no longer fueled by fear. When you know you are already whole, your actions flow from joy, not guilt. When you know you're loved, whether you succeed or fail, you'll take greater risks. You'll live larger because your value is no longer on the line. And ironically, that's when the world starts calling you successful. But now, success is not a way to prove your worth. It's simply the natural result of a mind that already knows it's enough. Wholeness isn't about being flawless. It's about being able to look at yourself and say, I made mistakes. I've learned. I'm growing. And I am still me, a lovable human, even while healing. A radiant soul, even when occasionally lost. A perfect being, not because I reached a standard, but because I stopped chasing one and returned to a self that never needed to perform. That is perfection without performance. That is you. The single eye heals. Sometimes, just one small shift in how you see can heal an entire world that's breaking inside you. Not through action, not through words, but through the gaze. Not the gaze of your two physical eyes that are easily distracted by appearances, but the gaze of the single eye, the vision of the spirit, the sight born of undivided awareness, from a place where you no longer divide things into right or wrong, good or bad, success or failure. This is the eye the scriptures call the single eye. And once it opens, your whole body will be filled with light. It's easy to get trapped in the old way of seeing. You see someone get angry and you conclude they are negative. You feel exhausted and immediately label yourself as weak. You watch the world celebrate success and assume you are falling behind. But all of that is merely the function of two eyes that look through the physical world, where everything is separated and labeled. We call this dualistic perception, and it cannot heal. To truly heal, you need another kind of seeing, not born of doctrine but of awakening, not born of analysis but of presence. It's when you stop judging someone and ask instead what happened in their past that made them protect themselves with anger. It's when you no longer see your own exhaustion as failure, but as a signal to care for your inner being. It's when you stop dividing people into right and wrong and begin to see that beneath every action is a soul trying to find its way back to the light. That's when you're no longer seeing with two eyes. You are seeing with the single eye. And that alone heals. Because the deepest wounds do not come from what happens to us, but from how we perceive ourselves in what happens. And if we view everything through the lens of judgment, of separation, of scarcity, then no matter what happens, it only deepens our fracture. But if we look from wholeness, from compassion, from inner stillness, then every event becomes an opportunity to understand more deeply, to love more fully, and to become more whole. Healing begins with how you see, and that seeing is not something you find outside. It is something you open from within. Like when you pause for a moment, close your eyes, and stop letting the world define you. You return, simply return, not to find a new answer, but to stop believing the old answers that no longer serve you. This is the power of voice within. Not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. When you return to that space, all outer noise loses its weight. All labels lose their power, and you will see there is nothing to fix, only something that needs to be seen more clearly. There is an old story of a pilgrim who climbed a mountain to find a renowned spiritual healer. The pilgrim poured out all his pain, his wounds, and losses to the master. The healer said nothing, but looked straight into his eyes in silence. After a moment, the pilgrim began to cry, feeling something heavy melt inside. When asked why he said nothing, the healer smiled and replied, "Because I saw you with a single eye, and that alone was enough for you to see yourself again." We all want to heal, but we often look in the wrong places. We search in advice, in books, in three-step formulas. But the truth is, healing doesn't come from adding more. It comes when we remove distorted ways of seeing, when we let go of the gaze of comparison, of blame, of inadequacy. And from that emptiness, light begins to emerge, quietly but unmistakably. Today, if you see someone doing wrong, pause before you judge. Ask instead, what light is being hidden underneath that behavior? If you feel weak, stop trying to become stronger. Gaze gently upon that fragility with compassion, the way you would look at a frightened child seeking refuge. That is when the single eye begins to open, and wholeness starts to return. This world does not need another perfect person. It needs someone who can see with light, and that light is never outside of you. It lives in your consciousness. Every time you choose to see with a single eye, you not only heal yourself, you also open a window of light for others to see their own wholeness. This is not philosophy. This is a living truth. And that truth doesn't need to be proven. It only needs to be seen with eyes that no longer divide. Then you will not only see the world differently, you will become the light the world has been waiting for. Living prayer. Have you ever considered that prayer is not something you do in the morning, hands folded, eyes closed in silence, but rather the way you live each moment of your day? Prayer is not a ritual. It is a rhythm of life. Not the words you speak, but the thoughts you silently carry. Not the sound you raise before God, but the vibration you hold within like an unending background melody. If you still think prayer is something you say, you are missing the deepest part of the sacred. True prayer does not make a sound. It weaves itself into the way you breathe, the way you walk, the way you look at someone without judgment. It is present in the way you wash the dishes, clean the house, respond to a message, and choose to remain calm when everything around you is in chaos. I used to think I needed to learn the right way to pray. I read books, took notes, memorized ancient prayers, but none of those words ever made me feel as deeply connected as the moment I sat quietly in the soft sunlight of an afternoon and realized I was breathing, I was alive, and I needed nothing more to be worthy of the universe's love. That moment, when I said nothing at all, became the most vivid prayer I had ever spoken, because I no longer believed I needed to tell God what I needed. I only needed to be present and know I was being heard. Living prayer means living as if every small action is a petition, a communication with what is unseen but always present. It is when you work with honesty, not to be praised, but because you respect the energy flowing through you. It is when you care for your body, not out of fear of illness, but because you see it as the living temple of your soul. It is when you choose not to retaliate, not to let emotions drag you into an old pattern, because you are praying, I want to live from the light, not from the dark. True prayer requires no sacred space or fixed time. It happens when you enter a conversation and truly listen with your heart. When you choose forgiveness over anger, understanding over condemnation, and trust over doubt. Every such choice, though silent, is a clear prayer sent into the invisible. And the invisible always responds, not with thunderous voices, but with small signs, unexpected doors, people who arrive just when you need them, or simply the quiet peace you feel in the middle of an ordinary day. This world is overwhelmed with words, with techniques, with endless guidance on how to connect spiritually. But I believe nothing is more powerful than a life lived as a prayer. A person who speaks nothing, yet their presence softens the room. A person who proves nothing, yet their energy makes others want to be better. That is prayer being lived, without bowing the head, without repeating old lessons, but through the deep simplicity of honest presence. Perhaps you have prayed and felt no response. Perhaps you have thought you were not good enough to be heard. But that is only true if you think prayer is a request. In truth, it is a resonance, a synchronization. When you live in the frequency of love, of understanding, of trust, you are in the highest state of prayer. And from that state, everything you need will begin to align in ways you could never predict. Not because you forced it, but because you are harmonizing with a higher order of life. Living prayer is knowing that your presence is the prayer. Every step is a message. Every choice is a vow. Every time you pause to listen instead of react, you open a gate to the sacred. And the beautiful truth is, you need no one else to validate that. You need only yourself to witness it. Let prayer no longer be something you separate from life, but the way you breathe spirit into every moment. Because you are not living an ordinary life, you are living a prayer. And if you live that way long enough, you will find that you no longer need to ask for anything, because you and the divine have become one. No more boundaries, no more waiting, only life speaking for you. In each breath, each gaze, each small but profound act. And you will come to see that this life, the way you live it, is the most beautiful prayer of all. Christ in you now. There is one thing no one has ever told you with true seriousness, and it is this. You don't need to go far to find God, or the light, or healing. What you are seeking is not in the future, not hidden on a sacred mountain, not behind a secret door. It is already here, right now, within you, Christ in you. Now, not when you become better, not after you have learned your lessons, not on a more perfect day, But right now, in this very being, full of contradictions, doubts, wounds, and, at the same time, filled with light, kindness, and the deep capacity for transformation. I used to think that to awaken, I had to abandon the world. I used to sit for hours trying to chase away thoughts, control every emotion, turn myself into something purer. But the more I tried, the farther I drifted. Because in the effort to perfect myself, I abandoned the living miracle unfolding within every flaw, every imperfect moment. Only when I stopped trying to become someone else did I begin to see him in me. Not through dazzling light, but through gentleness, simplicity, like a breath. Christ in you does not arrive after a ceremony. He does not wait for you to become holy enough. He does not need you to play a part. Christ in you means the source of wisdom, unconditional love, irrational courage, and spiritual strength to overcome every darkness. All of it has always been within you. You don't need to add anything. You only need to remove what is covering it. Old beliefs, judgmental voices, thought patterns that made you forget who you are. Look deeper within, not through the eyes of fear, but through the eyes of understanding. And then you will see you have never lost the sacred. The world will keep turning in its own rhythm. There will be times when you feel out of sync, lost, weak. But in those very moments, remember, the presence of Christ does not come to judge you. It comes to remind you that you can choose again. You can rise. You can look at everything with a new heart. You can live as if you are the light, because you are the light. This is not just a philosophy. It is a lived practice. It is every morning when you wake up and remember who is truly living within you. It is every moment you stay silent amidst the noise. Choose forgiveness over reaction. Choose trust over doubt. Choose presence over escape. That is how Christ is resurrected, not in a historical story, but in you, in today. I know, life is not easy. There are wounds you've never dared to name. There are dreams you've kept hidden for fear no one will understand. There have been times you felt disappointed in yourself, in others, even in God. But if there is one message I want you to carry after all of this, it is this: you are not abandoned. You are not alone. You have never lost the light within you. And the moment you remember that, you begin to live differently. Christ in you, now. Not a symbol to worship, but a frequency to live by. Not an idea to believe, but a reality to embody, to breathe, to become. When you live with that awareness, you no longer need anyone's approval. You no longer need to prove anything. You simply walk with humility and gratitude, because you know you carry within your heart the most sacred thing that no force can ever take away. I thank you for staying until now, for listening with both your mind and your heart, for allowing these words to reach the deepest part of you. Thank you for daring to face yourself, for not rushing away when things became deep. You are not just a viewer. You are a companion walking this journey with me, returning to what has always been there. If there is one final action I hope you take after this video ends, it is this: live, not perfectly, not pretending. Just live as if that light is real, because it is real. And then everything else will fall into place, in its own time, in the right place, with the right people. I'll see you in the next videos, where we will continue the journey of discovery, not of a new truth, but of you in a way that is fresh, profound, and full of light. This is the power of Voice Within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to,